Welcome back, everybody, to Niners Now. I'm your host, Brady Grustas, at GrustasBrady on X. You can follow me there. And today, after some Niners roster news, we are previewing the Las Vegas Raiders weekend. There's going to be joint practice today on Thursday and a preseason matchup on Saturday afternoon, and we're here to talk about it. And of course, stick around until later in the show when we talk about some surprise cut candidates. Before we begin, go ahead and subscribe down below, leave a like, leave a comment, and let's get into it. So to start off today, the 49ers signed wide receiver Malik Turner on Wednesday. Turner worked out with the Niners on Tuesday, and clearly he impressed because he is now back in the Bay. Turner actually first joined the Niners back in 2022 when he played 3 games for the team, and that stint was actually the last regular season playing time that he's gotten in the NFL, 3 years ago at this point. Turner was with the 49ers practice squad last year after some brief stints with the Colts and the Texans and the Raiders, but has not gotten back into the regular season action since 2022. Actually, Turner most recently played for the Michigan Panthers of the UFL, another UFL signing by San Francisco this summer. They brought in Jalen Allen and Bradley Anae, and now, of course, Malik Turner. Turner had an okay year for Michigan. He had over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, was definitely a contributor. But in the playoffs, Turner dominated. He went off. In only 2 games, Turner had 16 catches, 267 yards, and 4 touchdowns. In 2 games, that is wild. Unfortunately, his Panthers were not able to win the UFL championship, but Turner did show that he was ready for a return to the NFL. So Turner is back with the 49ers, and I gotta wonder, with all this wide receiver shuffling, do you go get a veteran soon? I mean, we've talked about Gabe Davis, we've talked about Amari Cooper, we talked about Keenan Allen before he was signed, but Odell Beckham Jr. has been in the news recently. He came out and said he is not retiring, he'd like to play this year, and I think the 49ers might be a good landing spot for him. You know, he's had some health issues over the course of his career, especially in the back half, but he's a very talented player, clearly, and he's a veteran, and he spent some time in this system. He played with the Rams, he played with Sean McVay, so he's familiar with some of the stuff that Shanahan likes to do. Let me know down below if you think the 49ers should go out and get Odell Beckham Jr. Now let's talk about this weekend's practice and game versus the Vegas Raiders. On first look, the Raiders shouldn't be as challenging a matchup as the Broncos were. There's still plenty of talent on this roster, but I don't think the Raiders are even close to as good as the Broncos are. But the Niners will face off against some old enemies like new Raiders head coach Pete Carroll and new Raiders quarterback Geno Smith, both of who are Seattle staples, both former Seahawks employees. They also brought in Jamal Adams, who was another former Seahawk. The Niners loved playing against Jamal Adams, I'll tell you that much. And former 49ers running back Raheem Mostert is also a Raider. So definitely there's some familiar faces in these joint practice and preseason sessions, but not all of them are friendly. But what are the best matchups that we're going to get to see over the course of this weekend? To me, the obvious one right off the bat is the Raiders tight ends and running backs versus the Niners linebackers and safeties. These 4 positions usually mix and match who they go up against. Tight ends will go up against linebackers and safeties, and so will the running backs. So I'm going to combine them all for this one. The Raiders have first-team All-Pro tight end Brock Bowers, who won the award as a rookie after a really amazing season. Now, I happen to think that George Kittle should have been the first-team All-Pro over Brock Bowers, but we will get to see easily the 2 best tight ends in football this weekend. Bowers is going to be matching up with Fred Warner and D. Winters. Man, I cannot wait. The Raiders also have 2 solid backup tight ends in Michael Mayer and Ian Thomas, so the depth is certainly going to be tested as well. How are guys like Nick Martin or Marquis Siegel at safety, how are they going to do covering these talented tight ends? And at running back, the Raiders are pretty deep. Ashton Jeanty was a top 10 pick in this year's draft, and for my money, he should have been the Heisman winner. He joins Mostert, Zamir White, Sincere McCormick, and training camp standout Dylan Laube in a very full running back room for the Raiders. Can Jason Pinnock and Jair Brown perform against a Heisman winner? What about depth linebackers like Tatum Bethune or Chaz Surratt? All 4 of these positions, the tight ends and running backs for the Raiders and the linebackers and safeties for the Niners, they've all got really interesting young players that I'm super excited to watch. Now for the next matchup, I've got to go back to the trenches. There are plenty of marquee matchups here, Trent Williams versus Max Crosby being one of them, but I want to talk depth here, okay? The Raiders have so many defensive tackles that I personally love. Thomas Booker IV, their new trade acquisition, looks incredible in camp, and he may end up starting for this team. Then there's former Robert Saleh Jet Lecky Fotu, and my favorites, they're two rookies, Tonka Hemingway from South Carolina and J.J. Pegues from Ole Miss. I was so high on both Hemingway and Pegues in the draft process. I was constantly including them in my mock drafts for the 49ers. The Raiders ended up taking both of them, and I can't wait to see how they match up against the interior offensive line of San Francisco. How is Matt Hennessy or Drake Nugent going to do against a guy like Pegues, a big nose tackle? Will Drew Moss and Connor Colby be able to contain Tonka Hemingway? How about Dom Pooney versus Thomas Booker IV? I want to see the guards and centers build momentum after a pretty solid week versus Denver. And while the Raiders don't have as much talent, they've got no one on the level of Zach Allen in the interior at least, there's still enough there to be challenging for sure. So Raiders defensive tackles versus the Niners centers and guards is one that I will be watching. Now let's flip sides and let's talk about the Niners defensive line versus the Raiders offensive line. The Raiders have some solid players. Colton Miller is an underrated left tackle. DJ Glaze had a pretty nice start to his career, I'd say, on the right side. Jackson Powers Johnson is awesome, but he's had a tumultuous training camp with injuries and battling for the starting center spot with Jordan Meredith. And Dylan Parham at left guard is a guy I liked coming out of college a while back. I obviously am going to keep my eye on the Nick Bosa and Colton Miller matchup, and I'm excited to watch Bryce Huff against DJ Glaze. But in the middle, how will Kalia Davis handle Jackson Powers Johnson and Dylan Parham? Will CJ West be able to win his matchup against Jordan Meredith? And there's fun matchups down the board as well. The Raiders took two offensive linemen back-to-back in the third round that I was super high on. Charles Grant at tackle from, I believe, William & Mary, and Caleb Rogers at guard from Texas Tech. Grant has been a big work in progress so far. He's very raw, so I want to watch guys like Bradley Anae and Trevis Gibson give him a real challenge. And Caleb Rogers versus guys like Alfred Collins and Evan Anderson will be a big matchup for him as well. Both of those guys have a lot of strength, and I think Caleb Rogers has some strength for sure, but his calling card was definitely his athleticism. I'm also expecting another big weekend from Sebastian Valdez against Raiders backup guards like, Alex Kappa and Antonio Mafi. I think Valdez will eat those guys alive. Kappa was maybe the worst starting offensive lineman in football last year. And if Valdez can do well against Kappa, I think that would be a really great sign for him. The Raiders' defensive line has a lot of talent, and so does their offensive line, but let's go to a position with a lot of question marks. Their cornerbacks. The Raiders took corner Darian Porter in the third round of this year's draft, and it looks like he might have to start right away. But that's more out of necessity than anything else. With no Jacorian Bennett, the other cornerbacks on this roster are Eric Stokes, Darnay Holmes, Decamarion Richardson, Greedy Vance, Caillou Blue Kelly, John Humphrey, and JT Woods. Raise your hand if you've heard of three of those players. I looked them up, so that doesn't really count. But this is not a strong group, all right? There's been some flashes in camp from Greedy Vance and Caillou Blue Kelly, but all in all, this is one of the weakest units on the entire team and one of the weakest cornerback units in the entire league, if not the weakest. Their best cornerback, Darian Porter, is a rookie. He's never played an NFL game before. So this is a perfect match for the very injury-riddled 49ers wide receiver room. I need Ricky Pearsall to dominate these corners, all right? I need him to really assert himself and be that number one type of guy. I also want to see a big week from Demarcus Robinson, Jacob Cowing, Russell Gage, all the way down the board, right? These are matchups that they should be able to win. And if Junior Bergen can show some nice things as a receiver, that would be phenomenal. And he'll have the opportunity to show those things against this Raiders secondary. So which matchups are you most looking forward to in joint practice and the preseason game? Who do you want to see have a big day? Of course, comment down below and leave your thoughts there. Now, the summer is full of changes for NFL teams, and one of those changes is letting players go. Over 1,100 players get cut every single year in the preseason as 90-man rosters cut down to 53. And every year, there are cuts that come as a surprise to fans. So who are some players on the Niners who could be a surprise cut candidate? We are quickly getting closer and closer to the roster cutdown day, so let's talk about it. Now, the first guy I want to bring up is edge rusher Yetur Gross-Matos. Gross-Matos was signed last offseason to a 2-year deal, and he has survived the mass exodus of defensive linemen that we saw this offseason. Javon Hargrave, Leonard Floyd, Malik Collins, all gone, but Gross-Matos is still here. But I think there's a real chance that Gross-Matos will end up leaving as well. We have yet to see him practice in training camp. He's been injured and held out all summer long on the PUP list. With Michael Williams and Bryce Huff now in the rotation, and some interesting depth edge rushers like Bradley Anae, Trevis Gibson, and Jonathan Garvin also on roster, Gross-Matos definitely doesn't have a spot on the 53-man roster locked up. He needs to get healthy and produce if he wants to be a 49er this year. Now, one thing that is on Yetur's side, I will say, is his contract. He's currently in the last year of his deal, but there are 3 void years on his contract, which means that after this year, he will be a free agent. But if the Niners cut him right now, they will have $9 million of dead money on the books with 0 savings against the salary cap. Financially, it makes no sense to cut Yetur Gross-Matos. So I think a more realistic move is that he gets kind of soft cut. He ends up on injured reserve, his season is over, and the team moves on from him next year. Kind of like what we saw with Elijah Mitchell last year. Now, the next guy I want to talk about has been honestly pretty healthy, but he was bad when he was on the field last season. It's safety Jair Brown. Brown was a promising rookie. He played sparingly, was sharing time with Logan Ryan, but he showed some good things. His sophomore season, though, was a huge disappointment. The Niners brought in Jason Pinnock and Richie Grant in free agency and drafted Marcus Siegel in April. And it appears that all 3 of those guys have passed up Jair on the depth chart. Jair is still a talented guy, no question about it, but he has yet to put together a consistent stretch of good games. He just hasn't put it together yet, and the Niners can't exactly afford to wait. So I think Jair Brown is definitely competing for his job this summer. It's been well documented that Steve Wilks was a huge fan of Jair in the draft. Wilks, of course, is not here anymore as the defensive coordinator. He's now with the Jets. So we will have to see if Brown can get back to his rookie form and earn a spot on the 53-man roster. And the last cut candidate that I have for today would not be much of a surprise to 49ers fans out there because we know that this dude is not all that good. But Nick Zakelj has a real chance to be left off this roster. Zakelj has made the 53 every single year of his career. And as a 6th-round pick from Fordham, that's pretty impressive. Last year, I thought he was actually kind of fine when he played late in the year when everyone was hurt, but he was horrendous against the Broncos last week. Just absolutely bullied on nearly every play. And the depth chart reflects that. Now that Ben Barch is out with an injury, 7th-round rookie Connor Colby is running with the starters at left guard. And that was Zakelj's spot last year. He was the primary backup at left guard and center. But now, Colby's passed up Zakelj. Drew Moss is also impressing at right guard, and Zakelj isn't even getting backup center reps thanks to Matt Hennessy. So there's just no more room for Nick Zakelj on this team. I think he's in serious danger of losing his spot completely this summer. So that's all for today. Let me know in the comments who you think could be getting cut once the preseason is over. Leave a like, leave a comment, and let me know if there's any topics you'd like to see me cover. Thank you all for watching, and subscribe for 49ers videos 5 days a week. I'm Brady Grustas, at GrustasBrady on X. This has been Niners Now, and I'll see you tomorrow.